Good afternoon, everyone. I am Peter Strong. I'm co-owner and director of Racing Magpie. On behalf of our entire team, I want to welcome everyone to another exciting presentation that's part of our new program called Winter Camp. And today we have another amazing panel of Ochethi Sakowin artists presenting their thoughts about their artwork in the Creation.Story exhibition. At Racing Magpie, we're dedicated to elevating and amplifying Native and other artists and their communities through educational, cultural, and research programs, all in the Lakota spirit of being a good relative. As part of that being a good relative, this program, Winter Camp, will reimagine the Lakota Winter Camp model of problem solving and community building in today's world by digging deeper into Lakota beliefs, creativity, culture, and community understandings. While these events are open to the public, they will always center and uplift Lakota community members as both presenters and attendees. As plants and trees focus their energy on building strength and growing from the roots during the winter, our community will join to strengthen and grow together each year through sharing and learning. We want to, part of my job is to thank our sponsors. So I want to thank the South Dakota Humanities Council, which is an affiliate of the National Endowment for Humanities, the Bush Foundation, and a direct grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Also, we often get asked how our supporters can contribute to our work during this process. I would suggest at least two ways in these times of virtual working and community care that you can support us and our work in our community. First, you can always make a donation to Magpie Creative, our nonprofit partner in our work. You can donate through their Facebook page or by mailing in a donation. The other is to support directly Native artists and makers and creatives by searching them out, buying their art, downloading their music, buying gifts for others or self-care for yourself, and do that directly from the artists. Venmo and PayPal are two great ways to show your support. With that, we will be taking questions through Facebook Live, and then I will relay those questions to the panel. Feel free to type those in anytime. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Keith BraveHeart.
Thank you, Peter. And again, welcome back, those of you who might have been joining us yesterday, and welcome to this event that we have today that's going to share our upcoming exhibition, Creation.Story. My name is Keith BraveHeart, and I also wanted to acknowledge Racing Magpie again. I know I've done this yesterday, but I also want to do it again today, just to thank them for all that they do for our arts, and really also for our culture as well too, here in our Lakota territories of Western South Dakota. Today's panel will include four new artists today. We have one artist who might still be on his way in, but some of our relatives are coming from Dakota Oyate. They're coming from the Dakota homelands. So it's nice to hear their perspective and to welcome them in as well too. And I'll let them introduce themselves more thoroughly, but I'll kind of give them at least the introduction of their names when we move to the next slides, okay? So if you're here yesterday, you know that I have a few slides that provide a little bit of context behind this project. And I'm just gonna go over this slide here and read it for everybody so they can get a better sense of what this exhibition and its really effort is all about. So Creation.Story is an art exhibition with cultural education programming that centers on the significance of creative expressions and oral traditions amongst Ochethi Sakowin cultures. Multiple artists representing their Ochethi Sakowin heritage provide visual artworks and creative concepts to engage audiences with the expansive creation narratives that underlie Ochethi Sakowin identity and values. Creation.Story presents the ancient spiritual entities and narrative figures culturally recognized as transcendent relatives and acknowledged as the central foundations for Ochethi Sakowin beliefs and lifestyles. The goal of this exhibition and its cultural education programming is to encourage all audiences, especially those across our Ochethi Sakowin communities, to practice creative and critical modes of cultural continuums. And this exhibition, it's curated by myself, but also David Meyer at Oglala Lakota Museum in Chamberlain, South Dakota. So we also want to give a good shout out to David, who can't join us today, but he's also very much a big part of helping to shape this exhibition and to help get it to where it's going. So we're very thankful for David as well too, as well as all other relatives there at Oglala Lakota who are behind this project as well too. Okay, so I want to introduce our artists today. And I'm very thankful for all the artists who are a part of this exhibition. And I'm very, very humbled that they would be a part of this exhibition when I first reached out to them to discuss this idea and to see their finished works and to hear their voice as it's helping to share this creation story has just been one of the best moments so far in my life as an artist, because I always enjoy art and I appreciate art probably first and foremost before I even get a chance to create it. So to sit back and really be in the presence of these artists is very great. It is very, I would say, transcended as well too. And I want to express that I do appreciate all of you, and I'm going to address you as relatives with kinship terms, because I want you to feel like you're being valued by me in that way, okay? So we have Tahashi James, who's there right now, right? James, you made it. There always is one in the group, right, that has to be on that Indian time example. No, but we're here. We're happy that James is here. And then we also have Hunkashi Randilynn and Hunkashi Marlena Myles. And then also Toshka Inkpa Mani, who's going to be here as well too. These are their relatives that they're going to be creating artworks for, and I'll allow them to be the ones to kind of describe those further. And we'll jump right in. We'll jump right in. And I also want to encourage the audiences again, as you see these artworks, as you see, as you hear these artists talk, please gather your questions. And after they've all introduced themselves and their work, then we can answer some of the questions or get into a discussion based off your questions. So let's begin with Tahashi James first. James, if you want to just introduce yourself and then you can talk about your piece, okay? I think you're still on mute, James. No worries. Yeah, it's not working. Yeah, there you are.
Yeah, so do you have the images, I guess, of the dolls that I created? I guess when I talk about that, I guess, but yeah, my name is James Star comes out. I'm from Oglala, South Dakota, and I've been doing art for, I guess since early 90s. And back then, I was more of a, I guess, two-dimensional artist, drawing, sketching, painting, kind of like when I was young. And but as I got older, I guess there was a part of me that wanted to know more about who I am, as a Lakota. So I had the interest into finding out more of using that art form with the talent that I did have, with the two-dimensional, and then that kind of opened up the doors to three-dimensional work. But my inspiration came from my grandmother. She was a quilt maker. Also, she did beadwork. So from there, and also, other family members like my father, my dad, he did a little bit of the beadwork and the quilt work. So, but those were kind of the inspirations to create what I do. So I'm just I'm just happy to be here today, explaining my work and based on the creation story. So, but we'll get into, like, I guess I'll get more into detail on the work I created for the exhibition. But thank you for that little time to, I guess, introduce myself.
Yeah, do you want to also introduce the piece that you have for this show?
Oh, okay. The piece that I have for the show, I do have. I entitled it Ampe Wiki Kolawayelo, which is the sun is my friend. And the piece that I created that for was we. And so from there, based on my own collective thoughts of the creation story, I created the dolls. There's a man figure and also the because it kind of goes hand in hand. But I'm not too sure if you wanted me to go into that, explaining that right now, or kind of my piece. Huh? Okay, well, with the creation story, yeah, he was the first, and from there, everything kind of was created from that. And with that in mind, we think of creation and the word woak. It's a spirit. It's a kind of a spiritual power, and with that, that's how everything else was created in that manner. That we all have that spirit in us, and with the creation story, that is symbolism of the blue blood, where everything was transcended from that. It goes into shka, we, all these were created from the blue blood, and so when you have that in mind, it goes down to we and what we represents. And in my thoughts, when Keith approached me with this on creating a piece for this exhibit, my first thoughts were we and fire, and also with it's kind of like not so much in your face what I created, but when you look at the pieces, it's of a man and buffalo, like I mentioned, and when we look at those, we imagine that, and the thoughts come to mind of the Wicahpi in the tree, and in the tree there's a man and the buffalo that represent those, and the image that I portrayed in there was where he shared the blood to create everything. So the doll itself is painted all blue, representing the blood of that created us, man, and everything else that's a part of us. So with that, even with the beadwork, when you look at the detail of the beadwork, there's kind of like an hourglass shape, blue and red, and that's a reflection of what's up there in the stars is down here on Earth, and that it goes to kind of to the star knowledge and the sacred sites here on Earth. So that's representing that on the vest, and also with the circle on the doll's face. There's a red circle that is representing the sun. So with that, you kind of start seeing the connection with everything that is on the doll, and so you would, I guess it's kind of more in between the lines of looking at the doll itself. I also put the Wapegnaka on the doll, and the Wapegnaka is a kachoka, which we have, they call it, some call it like a scalp lock, I guess, but that's where the Wapegnaka is attached, and that ties into one of our ceremonies, which is is keeping of the spirit. So it exemplifies our importance of our long hair that we have, So, you know, all that, and also when we're born, you know, our spirit comes in, and that's exactly where, you know, the spirit comes into us. So all of that is kind of like a representation of everything that my perspective, my own perspective of is what meant to me. So I created those in that manner. So with the buffaloes, also with that, you know, but the buffalo provided man with, you know, food, tools, you know, a way of life. Even we replicate how the buffalo live. So, you know, all that is entwined into what you see into the pieces that I created. And just to mention, you know, prior to today's meeting, I know the artists had met before, and at one time it was John Gozen Center and myself. We had a Zoom with Keith, and we were just kind of discussing the pieces and everything. And as I was explaining this to Keith and John, it sparked something, a thought to him, and exactly what I was talking about. And he thought of a song, and it was a Sundance song that talked about the sun being his friend like that. So that's where the idea of, when just talking with John, that the title came for this piece too.
Thanks, James. Thank you, James. Again, I know you just kind of got into it and you're the first one to go up. We appreciate you a lot. And I just want to back up a little bit for more of the audience to kind of get an example of your work, you know, of a lot of your samples of what you do artistically and creatively. A reason why I approached James is really his work is Lakota centric. I believe his work is always based in some sort of purpose and what it means to be Lakota. It's about identity, but also this authenticity that I just find very sincere and powerful. And I've had a chance to work with James on other projects, and one that's most notable is the exhibition that we did called The Horse Nation of the Ochethi Sakowin. And I know this shield on the right side is from that exhibition, but I know James has also created many other works that people might know him for, especially the horse regalia, but he also does things for his relatives, and he also does things that are meant to be utilized in this lifestyle, this Lako Wichoha, this way of Lakota being. So when he took this exhibition invitation, I knew that he would bring his perspective into whatever he was going to create, and he would do so as a relative. He would understand this relationship with we, and even just the extensions of we that maybe not every other person would ever consider. And I know that it's hard to, again, to be selective and to pick certain artists over others, because we all have a way that we can see and express what the we means to us. But I really do appreciate what James did here with his piece, and finding all these different very, very intimate details that are probably for audiences that have experienced these visuals or these observations in their own life that they can see and understand as well too. But as a wider piece that's for all audiences, we can find really just beautiful aesthetic, you know, a great you know, mastery and color scheme, and also just process when it comes to his traditional processes and just the technicalities of how he puts his works together. I think that these are just phenomenal. They're really an example of how these examples of how we have art forms that are in our tribal communities can match anything out there in the larger mass culture. So again, James, very, very thankful for you to be here. Let's move next to Hunkashi Randilynn. Randilynn, are you ready to introduce yourself?
Wicahpi, Ziktana Duta Win, Bdewakantuwan and Sissituwan Dakota na shinachadera oyate emataha. I'm very happy to be here with all of you today and to talk with you and, talk about these important things. So a lot of my artwork started with the quadrants of Dakota life, Lakota life, and they're really focused around my children. A lot of my learning started with my children. And so I really do acknowledge my children first because they were my teachers and they continue to be my teachers. And I say that because as Dakota Lakota people, our children were our focus and they're our center point. And when I first started creating things, I started with this cradle board, and it was very significant because it was a grounding point for my children. And so when I think of my art, a lot of times I don't think of it as art. I think of it as these items that I created to make sure that my children were grounded as Dakota, grounded as Lakota and Dine'e young women. And there were many teachings that were associated to them. So these two cradle boards here are cradle boards that I did create. And even with their creation, there was even more to it. I would think of all the teachings and things that I had heard, especially about the land, the stars, and how those are the map of our people, are tied to the land, are tied to the stars. Everything that makes our existence is right in front of us. And so if we acknowledge them and we understand them, then we gain a lot out of them. And so a lot of my designs takes in that thinking of what is before us, what is in front of us, and what should we acknowledge. And then taking that and applying it to like these cradle boards here. A child's going to lay in this for the first maybe up to 18 months of their life. This is what they're going to see. These are the images they're going to see. These are the teachings they're going to receive. And so making it present for them. I think a lot of the other things that I always try to think of is a cultural significance through the first quadrant of life. Those items that our children need as they transition, as we ground them and make them stronger. And so a lot of my work has really focused on that. And I think that it's continually growing and I'm continually learning because as my children grow, there's certain items, there's certain things that they're going to need and that they're also going to need to learn. So here I have pictures of the cradle board, but that even goes as far as like the womanhood ceremony. My daughter just went through her Yishnati ceremony and everything that was needed for her was created by her and by myself, but those were culturally significant things that she needed to know and that we needed to know. So once again, everything is really based on these stages of life and, grounding them and supporting not only my children, but relatives. And then the item that I created for the exhibit, Keith can show, was actually really a hard one. I worked with the relative Wicahpi, and when Keith first asked me this, I was a little bit hesitant. I have a deep respect for this relative even now. And, it took me a while to think about what was I going to create? What was I going to make that would represent Wicahpi? There's a very big dynamic that we're talking about here when we talk about this relative. And so it took some time and I asked and I talked to some relatives. I talked to, my relatives to ask them, well, what do you think? I also was fortunate to talk to the other panelists to get ideas, to get, thoughts from them. And what I ended up creating was this, what I call a quiver purse. I think with our relative Wicahpi, there's a balance with him or her. And a lot of times with that balance, our relatives always associate to a masculinity approach. And one of the first things that I wanted to do was take away that approach, that it was neither male or female. And so after talking with my relatives here, one relative actually helped me and kind of pushed me to think outside the box and take a modern approach, a modern spin on what I was going to create. And so here I created a bow quiver and a case and the bow and the arrow. And in doing that, it was also, thinking about everything that Wicahpi represented. When we think of Wicahpi, a lot of times we forget there's a little other parts of Wakia that are, you know, in our everyday life. When we think of Wakia here, I titled it Wakia Ta Wo Wakanki Wichoni Na Wichunte. The thunder power is life and death. And that's, you know, and that's, to me, that's what this bow represented. It represented that ability to give life, but to take life, and to also ensure that the continuance. There's a deep cultural significance to the bow and the arrow with Wakia. But in creating it, I also wanted to show in detail the relationship to the plants, to the winged relatives. And if you look a little bit closely at the quiver, you'll see that there's a floral design on it. As you know, one of my areas of art includes Dakota floral, but what I really wanted to signify was the cedar tree and the relationship between the Wakia and the cedar as one of our plant relatives. I wanted to show that there is a, you know, not only does Wakia have a relationship to us, but he also has a relationship to the land and the surrounding. And then on top of the cedar tree, I wanted to portray the relationship of the Wakia itself and the thunderbird. And this is a design that's an older design, and it's seen more among our older Dakota artwork, the 1800s to 1830s Dakota quill work. But I wanted to be able to portray the motif in a way that was respectful. I didn't feel, you know, when I look at some of this older artwork, I want to be respectful of it and know that maybe I don't quite have the right to represent it, but I can represent it in another way, to be respectful. And the same thing with the knife sheath here, the design on the knife sheath top and the design on the quiver top represented the top between the sky and the earth, and how there's a balance between Wakia, who is above us, but he's also, you know, he makes that connection to the earth and everything around us. So in creating this, it took a lot of thought, it took a lot of thinking, it took a lot of prayer. And when I say prayer, it was like, you know, making sure I knew my own boundaries, I knew my own how far I could go, understanding the deep respect for this relative, that it's not just an art piece, but it's a representation of a relative that still exists. One of you see the little detail pieces here. One of the things with this was the modern approach of a wokpa. So inside the quiver, it actually opens up and there's a wokpa to always be prepared. I thought that was a really important part of this, and like the teaching of, you know, life and death, is that one thing our relatives always had is they were always prepared, but prayer was at the most forefront of everything that we did. Even when, you know, you think of it as a weapon, it was also more than that. There was a significant cultural tie to the prayer and the ceremony of the people. And so in that, I put this pouch in there as a wokpa to represent that prayer.
Thank you, Ngashi. I really, really appreciate this work. I mean, I love all your guys' works, but I mean, everyone is just amazing to me every time I get to hear you guys talk more about them. And I really appreciate your involvement in this project, because I know that Wakia does bring so much power, and it can be very dangerous if not really probably respected in a way. And there's so many different dimensions of what you're covering, as far as also just the ambiguous, I don't know if we say gender, but just these dualities of Wakia. And I'm really a big fan of seeing your work depict Wakia and this different perspective that contrasts a lot of the masculine depictions of what we might always feel like might be the norm, even within our own tribal perspectives. So I hope that this piece, and I'm sure it will really encourage a lot of our young relatives now to really think, well, what is their perspective, and how do we maybe also give some sort of respectful attention to others as well too, just like you had mentioned in your statement. So really awesome. Thank you. Let's move on to our next, which will be Marlena. Are you ready?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Marlena Myles. I'm from the Spirit Lake Dakota tribe. I was born in Connecticut, where my dad's people are, the Mohegan tribe, but I actually grew up in Minnesota, Minneapolis, and in Rapid City, South Dakota. My mom was one of the first to leave the reservation to live in an urban area to give us those sort of opportunities. So it's only natural, I think, that I would grow up to create digital art living here in the cities where we have access to, I don't know, the internet back in the late 90s when I first got my first computer. But growing up in the urban areas, there was never anything taught about Dakota people in the schools. Even when I lived in Rapid City, I think there was like a Lakota language class that they offered in high school, but there was never anything before that that really taught our cultures in the public school system. So as an adult, I wanted to create the art that I didn't have growing up, create resources that I didn't have growing up that can be accessed by the Native people who live in urban areas or rural areas, because even though someone might think Minneapolis is like this modern city, it's still our traditional homelands, and I don't separate it the way that some people separate reservations and where we used to live. I like to think of it all as one. And so some of the pieces I use as teaching tools in classrooms that I visit here in the Twin Cities. The kids, they're all diverse, they all have different backgrounds, but when I show them our spirits or, someone like Ziktana Shaw, they're able to relate to these pieces. I think maybe because it's done in a modern way that is, it looks like the cartoons they watch growing up. And so they are able to ask me questions and relate to these spirits in a way that I think adults don't necessarily get. And so a lot of my pieces, like the Wakia, that piece there, I put it on Barn Bluff here in Minnesota, which is near Red Wing. And I use it to teach, the significance of Dakota homelands here, because there is a lot of activity being done by, the Dakota people here to reclaim our traditional homelands, because I think a lot of it was lost after the Dakota War of 1862, even more so than maybe the Dakota relatives. Like the Dakota people were scattered basically from Canada down to Nebraska throughout Minnesota. So we've had a harder time, I think, retaining a lot of our traditions compared to maybe the Oglala people, who have sort of a lot more people centered in one area. So I think as I work on these pieces, I'm able to educate kids, but I'm also educating myself and relearning things that I didn't learn growing up. So I guess I can talk about my piece if you want to switch slides, Keith. So the piece I was given to work on was Hongwi. She is the wife of Ochethi, which is the son. I was doing some research, and some Dakota bands, like the Wahpeton people, they believe that the Hanwi is and Ochethi, they're both the same spirit, just kind of like opposite sides, a female and a masculine side. So, but I also talked to my tribal historian, his name is Louis Garcia, about what sort of moons that we use. And he said there's actually, dozens of different moons that we had. Like the lunar calendar is based off of the seasons, and I guess we had 13, and so that's why it's called 13 moons. And each of these moons represent like a month, and it's something, they can represent a ceremony or an activity that the people had to do in order to provide as a village. And so the moon, I guess in the Creation.Story, she's married to the sun, and he gets tricked and lets another woman sit in her seat during the fest, like they're having a grand feast, and she gets embarrassed by this, and she ends up they end up sorting out the business so that she's basically divorced from him. And whenever she sees him, she hides her face beneath a cloak, and that represents the different moon phases. You could say she'd also represent women, the feminine power. They say too that when we're young, when we're middle aged, and when we're elderly, that's also represented in the moon phases. Women, like our menstrual cycles, they also call it your moon cycle. And I think, like I've read before too, that women aren't allowed into certain ceremonies when you're on a moon cycle. And some people look at it as a way that they're discriminating against women, but people have told me that's because your moon cycle is much stronger ceremony than any that we might have on Earth, like the sweat lodge ceremony. So that's a reason why, as a woman, you're not necessarily allowed into these ceremonies during that time, because you are much more powerful than what's going on in there, and your energy can interfere with everybody else's. So they say during your moon time that it's important as a woman to think peacefully in your mind and be ready to reset when the cycle starts over again. But this piece itself, I created in Adobe Illustrator, which is a computer program. There's 13 moons. I picked 13 that I felt were easiest for me to illustrate. There are, of course, different names that Lakota people might use and other Dakota bands might use, but I felt like these ones for me were easiest to illustrate. And along with this piece, there's an animation that goes with it. And to Dakota and Lakota people, the stars were a guiding force for us. And when we're born, we come through the Gate Dipper, or the Big Dipper that you see there, that also represents the 7 council fires. And when you're born, child is they're a great gift to the people. And so even the turtle and the salamander, those are where a child's born, the umbilical cord, they sew them into these sort of talismans to protect the baby. Even that's represented in the stars. So I think I consider like the stars a teaching tool that, it showed us our ceremonies, our respect for life, and our sacred places on earth are represented in the sky, because they believe that what's on earth is mirrored in the sky. So I think no matter where we're at on our homelands, you can look up at the stars and it will always be like a guiding force for you. It always grounds you. You might not even be on our traditional homelands. You might be, somewhere else in the United States, and you might be longing for home. And I feel like the stars, they will connect you with your people still. And it's very significant to me. I think even in the cities, I can still see these stars. And of course, going out to like Rapid City, going through South Dakota, or going up to my reservation, North Dakota, you see so many more stars than you do here in the Twin Cities. But I still feel connected to our past when I look up at the stars. So I just wanted to create this animation that will illuminate those traditional teachings. And I want to have this projected on the ceiling to represent as if you're looking up through a teepee, and each of the teepee poles, the 13 teepee poles, represent each month. And you will see the stars as if you're looking through a teepee, because they also say Hanwi decorates her teepee with the stars. So that's a connection between this piece and the previous piece.
Thank you, Marlena. And one of the things that I really feel excited about with our exhibition is just the diversity of media, and really how this can be something that offers something for everybody, especially for a lot of our primary audiences, which collectively we've all identified as being youth. We want to see the youth come into this exhibition and engage and take something away, and hopefully create some sort of continuum with their oral traditions. And I think that it's going to be beautiful to include graphic design, Adobe Illustrator, these digital formats, but also even animation, just to see how installation and how we might change the space of what normally we might feel can only be occupied by certain art forms. So I'm really thankful to have you involved in this as well too. Okay, so thank you, Marlena. Let's move next to our final artist, our young artist. We have a few young artists in this group because, again, like I mentioned yesterday, we really want to entrust in them what they can absorb through this process and this whole collecting of energy and stories, and how are they going to pass that forward? How are they going to start to look beyond only the object of the artwork, but also into whatever else might approach them and opportunities? Maybe it's education, or maybe it's all these new creative outlets as well too. So let's turn it over now to Toshka Inkpa.
How Wicahpi, Inkpa Mani and Wicahpi, Damakota na Sisituwan Pabaksa na Meshika na Taru Omada Oyata Dine'e. Inawayaki Tewayaki Simon na Anita Dumars Wicahpi. Itoapi Owa Kare Wichashta Dine'e na Awana Tawani Tioshpazina Wayawa Tipi. Chihuahua na Delicias Mexico, Hemataha Ta Wana Wheaton, Minnesota, Edwati. Hi everybody, my name's Inkpa Mani. Right now I'm living in Wheaton, Minnesota, but I'm a teacher at Tioshpazina Tribal School. And I'm a painter, and I would say I'm also an image maker. And that's what I received my bachelor's of fine arts in at the University of South Dakota in 2019. Was my as a painting major. And these are some of my works that I've been working on, and some of the ideas that have been forming with the help of a lot of pretty cool artists such as Keith and Randy. I mean, really all of the relatives here. For my thesis show, or my graduating show, what I focused in on the importance of an Indian name, and why our relatives can choose to still hold those names while we express them, and how that still impacts us today, just as these relatives, the Wakantakaki. So the painting on the left is of my grandma, my Kushi, Pat Gill. And I wanted to express with these paintings on the left, it's a series of about 8 paintings. As Dakota people, we were depicted really, really early on by Jesuits, missionaries, and then like Seth Eastman made a lot of paintings of our Dakota people, but somewhere along the way, the contemporary images of our people kind of started to disappear, kind of move out of the light. So I wanted to make sure that if I'm going to create a painting, that I try to depict our people today, or as how I perceive them. So this is my grandma. She's pretty cool. She helped start our tribal school at Tioshpazina back in the late 70s and in the early 80s. And it still exists today. And, that school has grown so much. So a lot of my inspiration for the works that I've been working on are based on my relatives that I surround myself with. And then the painting on the right is kind of the things that I started noticing within my artistic practice, and as being a Dakota, being a native person here in the United States, and then of Mexico as well, that the role that Indian arts play, both in our community and outside of our community, how that's monetized, and how it created an economy that both benefits yet holds us back in some ways. So the painting on the right is titled Art Market Bondage, and the idea that you can be bound to a market, and just the different ways that it affects us. So my relative that I've been working with is Unkana Tate. Tate is kind of seen like the wind. And that was really hard for me at first to figure out what do I have to say. I was 23, thinking about, I guess, 22 and 23, what do I have to offer in a dialogue about, you know, creation figures, these grandfathers and grandmothers that, you know, started all what is today. So I took a lot of time reading, asking my relatives, but a hard part of our Dakota Oyate is that we lost a lot of some of these things by forced removal, by introduction of alcohol, and just the different massacres and tragedies that happened to us. Survival was more important sometimes than making things. And so because of that, we lost some of the things. So it was hard for me to find firsthand accounts or written accounts about what our perspective was on this. So I had to just kind of dig in myself within my own spirituality and start to unravel those things, and then lean on some of the previous documents to gain understandings of those. I spent a lot of time alone making this work. I spent a lot of time outside, literally just listening to the wind, because it still exists. These relatives still exist with us. It's not like they passed away. They're still around. They'll continue to be around after we're here. And one of the things that I thought about and like reading about Tate was like this duality, as both being a force of power and being gentle, but also a power that can be strong, like you would see in a hurricane or in a tornado. So I started to form my ideas based on that these figures, every time I looked at them, I was seeing that there was a duality between them. And I started to learn more about Inkpa Mani, that as above, as below. And I started to model my understanding of the Wakantaka under that. And then seeing it repeated within a lot of our arts, like the Wicahpi or the Parfletch rawhide paintings. And that's kind of what I modeled this off of. And that came through a lot of inspiration of Oscar Howe, and his writings, his teachings, conversations that I've had with his students, that one of the ways that he understood these stories was that grandmothers or elders would sit down and they would do Parfletch drawings, and there'd be someone next to them sitting, and they would be telling these creation stories. So that our creation stories weren't just audio, but they were visual as well. You were getting these images, so when you would walk across a camp, you could identify stories based off of these Parfletch drawings. So that's why I chose to split my image kind of down the half, reflect itself kind of like as above, as below. And those were the early kind of thoughts about it. And then in thinking about it, I thought about it as being, like Keith has mentioned before, like this great cinematic experience, listening to these stories, the images that kind of like go through your head of these creation figures as the world's being created, as orders being placed. As just like a young person, like it really just explodes in my mind how all of this stuff happens, and it makes sense to me scientifically. It makes sense. But the other thoughts that I had about it is that our people were very scientific people, and we still are. We observe nature, and that's where we get an understanding of our spirituality. And in doing that, I was thinking, well, what is wind? Well, wind is the power of a high pressure and a low pressure, or warm air connecting with cool air. So that's what the red and the blue kind of represent, is that warmth and that cool, that hot and that cold. And a lot of our ceremonies kind of express a lot of these dualities. Like the Inipi, we have, you know, the heat of the fire, the heat of those stones that are mixed with the water. And within that, it creates a space of wakan. So in thinking about that, that's kind of how I went with my color palettes, is looking at this movement of air, this movement of heat and cool, creating wind. So in the painting, I kind of went more abstract with it. That was a little bit more of a challenge for me, but I wanted to just stick with that Parfletch idea that, you know, a long time ago, I believe our people had the ability to paint and draw naturalistically, or like a photograph if they really wanted to. but their highest form of arts was expressing the most with the least. Abstraction, utilizing something so complex and trying to get it down so that a child could understand that, or anyone that encounters it could understand. So I try to work with abstraction and then just show that the tate figure kind of operates within those things. Then the bottom panel it's called the predella in painting, which is like an altarpiece terminology, but it shows the different stages of the wind throughout the year. So the spring, the summer, the fall, and the winter. And that came from like my mother always, my Ina always kind of talking to us that listen to the wind throughout the year, it'll tell you something. And then this next series of sheer fabric panels, what I was interested in was helping youth and just people that might not have a strong connection with these figures realize that these figures are always around us. They're always, they've always been there, but we just maybe forgot that, or we've lost the identification of them, of calling them our relatives. So these sheer fabric panels are supposed to be suspended from the ceiling, and just the slightest breeze or the slightest movement will create these figures to move. And I was interested in different tableaus or different scenes, or tableau vivante, which is like a scene that is alive or a scene that is moving. So the first one is tate, both being a force of wind, opposing movement and creating that. The next one is how we create our own wind through movement, through how we use our hands in life, and how the winds move us, and also through song as an expression of tate. And then finally, there's a couple scenes in the epic of our creation figures that I thought about, and one of them talk about that tate was the one that was in charge of breathing life into all things. So that's tate, breathing life into creation as we see it today. But those are kind of my initial thoughts on those things. Okay.
Thank you, Inkpa. Really, really awesome, man. Excellent. Great. So I'm thankful again for all of you to be a part of this, and really all that you're going to bring into this, and how it's going to inspire those who are going to come to this as well too. And I want to kind of conclude this section of the event with just another reminder about the exhibition, that it will be a traveling exhibition. It's going to open first at the Oglala Lakota Museum in Chamberlain, South Dakota. Our opening date's in December 2021 this year, and it will run until May of next year. The first venue that has been confirmed that will host the exhibition will be our relatives at the Heritage Center at Red Cloud Indian School in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. They'll be sharing the show in fall of next year. And then the second confirmed venue will be our relatives at the Britton Museum, which is in Bighorn, Wyoming. They'll have the show for a good duration of 2024. And we are still in the process of confirming a few other venues. Our thinking is that we want to make this accessible to our homelands, but also kind of broadening out our directions in which way we're going to move this into, and how we're going to take on this new concept of sharing more of this creation story. So almost like a chapter 2 is what I've been kind of calling it. But with that, we're going to involve these artists, all of these artists that you had a chance to hear yesterday and today. And they're going to also in turn welcome in other artists who are going to come in and help create new artworks as well too. So there's a lot of good exciting things yet to come. And at this point, I think we will take questions now. Peter?
So far, there aren't any direct questions. There's been a lot of appreciation for what the artists have said. One comment says, everything shared is so beautifully crafted, and it's impressive to hear all our relatives' artistic influences and the family and band stories that shape their chosen tools and contributions. But as folks have questions, I'll jump in with them as we go.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, yeah, audiences, if you have any questions, please share them with the artists, and please take advantage of this time with them as well too. But I'll get you guys going. I'll give you guys a prompt, and maybe you guys can start sharing more of your thoughts. Let's just begin real generally with, what is this exhibition to you, each of you? What is it to you? And then also kind of what do you see this as providing to others? Should we start first with Hunkashi Randilynn?
I think at the beginning it was really a learning about what this started with, and then over time it started to become even more. One of the things that really made it clear for me was I was doing some research, and I was researching my own Dakota relatives, and I was looking at my great grandmothers and grandfathers. And I came across this article that talked about one of my grandmothers, and I had to translate it from Dakota into English. And one of the things that I read in there was about her, and her name was Prazahiayewi. And it talked about how she was an exquisite quill worker, bead worker. She sewed teepees. She was known for tanning hides. And in reading that and translating that, it made me see the continuum. And so when we talk about creating art of, these certain relatives that we've worked with this past year, you also see that continuum within our relatives down to us. And so as I started to, think about that and think about the piece that I created and the style that I did, it was kind of very touching, because I didn't know this about her. I didn't know she was a quill worker. I didn't know she was known for these things. And so it was like now passing that on to the children, these young women, these young men. It was like, this is that continuum starting from our very first relatives, and it has to continue. And that's how we exist as people.
Thank you. Tahashi James, you want to go next? You got to unmute yourself.
1 2 1 2. Can you hear it? Okay. Well, I think it's the expedition is really important for our relatives, as far as the expression that we're doing as artists. I mean, we could share a lot of things like verbally, but an artist shares and creates things visually. And I think that's very important, because a lot of times just by visualization, words really don't have to be said. It's the individual will I guess understand it in their perspective of what they see. So I think as far as an artist, I think it's really important that we as artists are needed within our culture, because that aspect of who we are is what we create. And so like with the pieces with mine, everything that is pertained to the sun, heat, I mean, it's all contained with everything else, like with Hanwi, with Kate and Wakin. All those are part of we and the connection with the Wiwangwachi. So with that, everything and the symbolism is what I talked about before, is that the blood of Ian flows through everything. So we're connected regardless of individuality, but we're connected in that manner. So with that in mind, like I said, with my creation there, the doll and the buffalo do have a chungaleshka, which is a kind of like a hoop, and with that, they're connected in that manner. And also with the red circle on the doll's face and the buffalo underneath the chin of the buffalo is a red hoop. So those are representing the importance of we in our culture. And, so, this visual expression is very important. And that's me, I guess it's my Ochethi. That's just what I was given as gift to share with the world. So I do that with creating visually for people to just understand who we are as a nation.
Thank you, James. Marlena, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think when people come to the exhibition, they'll see how each of the 8 artists, or more, I guess, the 10 at least, that we all have our strengths and we all have a certain medium we wanted to work with, but we also found the power in these spirits that inspired us. And so that spirit sort of was channeled through our strengths to give to the people, the things that we learned while we're studying in spirits, or the connections we had to the spirit. So I think, the youth that come to this exhibition, they'll see a wide range of mediums that we do work with. They'll see how innovative our people have always been, whether it's working with a simple stone or, working with a computer or paints or quill work or beads. They'll see we can take anything and use it to represent our culture in an authentic way.
Very good. Inkpa?
What was your question again?
Just generally, what does this show mean to you, and maybe what do you see it as its potential?
Okay. I guess what the show meant for me at first, it was reconnecting with these relatives. And going to Wicahpi and Inkpa, we talk about them, but this show really helped me reconnect with it, like finding that deeper connection as a relative and really starting to call them as my relatives, and really making that more part of my life over the last year and working with this. But what it means for me is really like our people coming back to these stories and making it the center of the home. At school, we talk about it always starts in the home, and some of these stories, they haven't been in our communities or in our homes for a couple decades or several, or maybe even 100 years. So reintroducing those narratives, reintroducing those conversations back into our everyday life, and then hopefully helping students, helping youth, people my age and older, gain an understanding and appreciation to these relatives as they still exist today. Those are kind of like the thoughts that I really kept coming back to, is that bringing them back into our everyday, acknowledging them as we see them, kind of like that.
All right, thank you. Peter, is there any questions yet?
Yeah, there's a couple that have come in. The first one is directed to Randilynn, and someone wants to know what your very first piece of art was, and what was it, and what inspired it. And that might be a question that everyone could address too.
My very first piece of art was my first daughter's cradle board. I want to say a larger piece that I've ever made was her cradle board. And it was very significant because, I was a young mother, and I was still learning, but I knew I wanted my daughter to be culturally grounded. And I started to try to figure out how I was going to make it. And I got help from my mother and my grandmother-in-law and some of the unchis from my husband's community here in Pine Ridge. And it was her cradle board. And when I started to create it, it just started to come together. And I feel like even though that's a bigger piece, that became one of the pieces that I continue to focus on with each of my children. And it was significant because each of them would carry those themselves as they were young women and mothers. So that was my daughter, Wicahpi, Ti'ik, her cradle board was one of my first creations that was really impactful for me.
Yeah, how about we just pass that question on to all of you. Whoever wants to go next, just go for it, jump right in.
Yeah, I could. I don't really have necessarily which the actual piece that I created first, but when I was younger, I did a lot of pencil drawings and watercolor and acrylic. But as far as an artist, I guess professionally, it was probably with Brother Simon down at the Red Cloud art show. And I did it wasn't traditional. I guess it was kind of like a mix, contemporary, where I did this hatchet. The head of the hatchet was metal, but the handle, what I did was I carved the handle of it, and there was a lot of different symbolisms in that handle. And so that would probably be the first piece that I ever done professionally as an artist, just being real young and just starting out. So that's probably my first piece.
I guess I can go next. The first piece I created in Adobe Illustrator, I've worked with other programs and mediums before this, but the first I created in Adobe Illustrator was called Wakahutanina, which means little voice of power. And it had a little falcon in the middle, and surrounded was like black and white lines that went in like a circular manner. And to me, it just represented like the light and dark represents maybe good and bad. And in between all of that, to always speak the truth, no matter like the consequences or whatever. So that was what I figured was like the little voice of power, and like the little falcon sort of represented that voice. So that was the first piece I ever created in Adobe Illustrator.
I remember making like when I was maybe in like third or fourth grade, really starting to draw. But I would say when I really felt that I made a piece of artwork was probably my second year of college at M State, and I made a painting. It wasn't really that large, as maybe like 20 by 20. And it was a painting of a Dakota, and it was just like a portrait face on, and he had face paint, and it was a super stoicized image of a Dakota with dark skin, and tobacco pouches and all that stuff all around him. And so at first I thought I was really proud of it, because I realized I was capable of making images that could stand by themselves. So that's when I first felt that I made art. But following that, I really started to feel that I didn't like it, because it wasn't really what I was copying, what I thought native art was at the time. And that I found out that most of what those images weren't from our own people. Eventually, the USD ended up buying that painting in their and it's in their permit collection now. And at first, I was really troubled that they bought it, because I didn't want that, for what other Dakota people that would go to USD to see was that that's the image of us. So from that point, that's really when I changed my ideas of what my art would be. So that was really instrumental for me, I guess, for my art. That's when I would say I became an artist.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys. Peter, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, we've got another one. Someone asked, what kinds of stories did any of you come across that do not emphasize the male-female gender binary among Ochethi Sakowin?
I'll leave that one open, whoever wants to take that one.
I guess one way that I look at that is, so in our creation story, when Tate Tate's wife was Ite, which becomes Anuhik, their double-faced woman. So in that story, she disgraces not only herself, but her parents and her husband, and then the moon and the sun. But when I see like that role of male, female roles reverse in a little way, is that it kind of says that Tate should have been watching these things more and been more observant. So not really as punishment, but somebody needed to take care of his kids. They had 5 kids, the 4 directions, and then the whirlwind. So they said that Tate was in charge of raising them to be good people, and he had to do women's work and take care of the home until Wicahpi arrived, and she then took care of that. So that's one way I could see that role reversal kind of switched. I think that's important today, just to know that men have the capability to take care of a home if their partner isn't there.
Thanks, Inkpa. Anybody else have any additions?
Well, I was gonna say, if you look at the life that they lived back then, men and women, they had very important roles that everybody had to do to make the tribe function, you know, so that the people could live. And even the language, you know, that even has male and female verb endings or whatever, that's, you know, that's the philosophy, the viewpoint. But even with that being such a strong part of our culture, there was still like the 2 spirit people, but then there are also Akia, which was, you could say was both or was neither. It's up to you how you want to view that spirit. So I think, you know, we talk about male and female spirits or whatever, but even with those being prominent parts of society, that they've still looked upon the spirits as still being able to be neither. And I think that's an interesting part of Wakia if you want to study that spirit.
Thank you, Marlena. James, Randilynn, either of you have any thoughts you want to contribute?
I think in regards to material or research that we've come across, I know in Walker's, when he's talking with Sword, he talks about Wakia, and just like Chapanshi had just said, that Wakia was born neither male or female. And we know that relative to be in that way. And I think when we look back to our relatives at that point, there was a very strong sense of identity and connection to how we existed as relatives. And I think with today, you see the change in that, because that's not the way it is anymore. So if you look back within our relatives, even the ones that we are working with, you'll see that there was always an acknowledgement of the role that everybody played. There was always a balance between men and women. Neither one was above the other. And that's a very significant part of our society and how we live as people. But also acknowledging that it's not our society was not black and white, where we were, going to disgrace another individual for the way they were. Instead, they were acknowledged for their way of being. And when we think of the relatives like Joaquin or the other ones who have, their own way of being, there was a gift that came with them, and they had something to give to the people. So there was never this idea of, hierarchy in the sense of, when we think about, gender binary today, that wasn't something that was within our societies.
Very, very well said. James?
Yeah, I just want to kind of add on to, I guess, a little bit of Inkpa and Randy and Marlena's kind of thoughts. Within our society, the Oyate, women and men and women have their certain roles also, with even as far as the youth to the elders have their roles and everything. So, and with our society, with our grandfathers and grandmothers, they played a role in teaching the children. There was a certain age that the male children would go with the men and start learning that aspect of it, and the girls would go with the mother and and the aunties, like that, so and so forth. So those were kind of roles that we had as, I guess, organizing we as a people. So those have to be instilled into us to, because when you look at the Ochethi Sakowin, we have seven big oyate. And when you break that down, in each one, you know, we have 4 Dakota and the 2 Dakota and the Tito, you know. So when you break all that down, it goes further down into Tioshpai and then down into the family and then to the individual. So each of them played a role in that. And when you think about that, you know, even with the war, I guess with the Oglala Lakota, you know, the Akichita, you know, we had these societies, and also the women played a role in that too. And they call them Katala. You know, they're a women's society that, you know, they also participated in war. So, you know, but today in today's society, it's different from the way our ancestors were. Like one example that I always kind of, I guess one thing that I do share is like with the flute, you know, the shiothanka, you know, playing of the flute. That specific role is for the male. The male plays the flute, and you know, there's a story to that on how it comes about, and that's the role playing that the men had with the flute. But today, what you do see is that female are playing those flutes now, and that kind of crosses the boundary of what that flute was created at that time. So there's I guess change of times, you know. But you know, I'm just an old school guy. I just but I truly believe that instrument is for the male. And you know, that's my thoughts on that part of it, that question.
Yeah, thank you, James. And I think I'll also add a little bit in as well too. But I think what you're all really sharing is that there's many different beliefs and perspectives, and how these individualisms become collective culture, and how we maybe add into that. And I know that this is part of discourse that's out there on our society and on our identities as Ochethi Sakowin. There's a lot of different resources that help kind of shed light into these different periods of times. And I think with that, it leads to, you know, that there's evolution involved. You know, that it's always going to be, well, who's the authoritative voice in writing this, you know, kind of perspective, and how does that influence the reader, maybe? When it comes to our creation stories, I mean, we can really critically examine that a little further as well too, and we can really adopt the I would say the authentic identity of the Uhunkanka, the very, very ancient. And maybe there's a few sources left that still have that direct thread to those origins of how that came to be. And Hunkashi Randilynn kind of talked about that as well too, saying that at a certain point, I think these stories were really more elevated in just their performance. They're very artistic as well too, and that there had to be a creative involved with how they imagined these stories and how they transferred that onto the audiences. And Inkpa talked about that with his piece as well too, that there was a visual artist that was sometimes involved, so almost like a collaboration, right? But maybe a lot of the I guess examples that are still lasting today point out that there was an individual. And George Sword is probably one of the points of origin for a lot of how we understand creation stories to be written today, and really James Walker's involvement. So that kind of makes us also start to look a little even more critical as, well, how would we examine James Walker's role in Pine Ridge territory when he was here documenting these stories, and then kind of like structuring them into his own system of how he wanted to organize this telling of the story, and personifying certain relatives, the Wakantanka key, into certain characters with certain attributes as male or female. And then how do we maybe I guess look at that and try to find a different point of view, like Ella Deloria did in her work as well too. So we talk about the greatness that our relatives are really resourceful. They have this higher thinking, and it's always been there for many centuries. The same can be said for how we recognize these relatives, and even just maybe what was important to even tell as a story. As is there a need to attach some sort of a gender to it at all? Most likely not, right? It came with the change of the times, and especially I think in today's time, like we're hearing from the artists as well too, is that how do these start to become alive in the minds of the audience, especially youth? How are they going to attach something that they want to feel compelled to even look further? Maybe it's this something that's a similarity to their animation, or maybe it's a prior generation that has more of the old school vibes, like Tahashi James as well too. So I think that there are sources out there, and this is something that any interested individual can go and look into on their own as well too. I would recommend a good starting point is maybe picking up Lakota Myth by James Walker and just taking a glance at the bibliography and the other resources that they might look further. If you have the luxury of having a tribal college, maybe go there and look around as well too. You're gonna find something as a starting point, and then I would always encourage you to go look further. Always try to go to what's the source of that and see what you can find. But of course, the ultimate recommendation is ask your community, ask your relatives. And this is what I have been told when I ask a lot of these elders and really respected individuals who really speak about our Ohunkanka. They tell me, go talk to your community, go talk to your elders, go talk to your cultural bearers if you have that still at home. And you're probably going to hear something that's going to be even more dynamic, most likely. And I'm sure all of us have probably encountered that to some point as well too. But that's the whole point of this exhibition as well, is to encourage that. How can we begin to let those resources emerge so that we don't always have to just go to the library, but we can actually see that these are living within our communities, but also maybe even further that they're within our artist community as well too. You know, or maybe we recognize that there is a role as artists that we have to take these on and try to make those available, like you guys are already saying with all of your intentions for what you do with your work. So yeah, sorry guys. Peter, is there any more questions?
Yeah, I think this next one builds on your earlier question to the panel, but if it triggers any more thoughts, it's how do you hope your art impacts people in your community, in your tribe, and beyond?
That's a good one. Let's start with Marlena. Let's put her on the spot.
Well, since I teach my art to a lot of kids of different backgrounds, you know, I hope they listen to what I teach them, and, you know, they grow up and become politicians and give our land back. I don't know, you know, make it easier so that, you know, the kids today, the Dakota kids today, when they grow up and want to make changes, you know, they have a lot more allies who know who we are from being kids. So, you know, I look at, you know, we all get back to our tribes and all that, but since I live here in the cities, you know, I want to make sure that the urban youth, you know, they have someone looking out for them too.
Who wants to go next?
I could go next on that. I think the importance, I think, is that as an artist, I want to just share with, especially with the younger generation, the work that I do is to give them that identity, because they're the ones that are going to take our culture into the future. So I think it's my obligation as an artist to share, you know, the knowledge through the arts to our young people.
I can go next. So I guess one of the hopes for my work is that outside of our communities, they can see the complexity of our beliefs and how real it is for us. I think the focus for like a lot of these creation things, we look towards like Europe. We look towards the Norse or the Greeks and the Romans for these large epic narratives. But, you know, we are here, and we in this continent, we are here in our homelands, and we have those epic stories that I think other people could benefit from just learning as well. And I hope that they see that too, just like wherever these shows go, both our Dakota and non-native people, that they see that the complexity, the amount of thought, how much like philosophy goes into our work, that we're trying to elevate everything we do because we appreciate them as relatives. And so like for my work, like even using words like tableau, predella, tableau vivante, I'm reaching back to old world masters so that I can be in conversation within that canon of art.
I think when I look at my art and what I create, I like to look at it in a form of living art. I love to create things, but more importantly, I like to teach and work with different people in different communities. To me, it's rewarding to know that, you know, going into a community and working with them on cradleboard workshops or making baby bonnets and the things that their children will need lets me know that there's 20 to 25 other babies that are going to come into the community who are going to be grounded with the cultural items that they need to start their path in life. And so for me, it's like, you know, right now we're living in a time where it's hard, and, you know, and still being able to do that and, you know, reaching out to people and all these young ones, these new ones that are coming, and, you know, and creating this art with them and creating it so that in this first, you know, year of their life, now they're going to be grounded in these cradle boards. They're going to be cherished and loved by their relatives who have learned to make them. And, you know, I hope that my art, you know, can reach the children like that and ground them and make them stronger, because they're going to need to be stronger. And then also creating art for relatives for the way that they need it, and being able to be a resource to help others learn, and not just, you know, I'm happy that my art is in different places, but I'm even more happy when it's in the homes in the community.
Very, very good. All of you. I believe you all. Very good. Peter, any more questions?
Yeah, we've got one here it's a question about voice and agency, I think, and it says, as Lakota and Dakota people, how do you all feel about other tribes painting our chiefs and historical figures? And in the same thread, how do you feel about artists from other tribes appropriating designs and aesthetics from our culture?
Okay, guys, so take that in real quick. I'm sure it's probably something that has been on your mind at some point, right? And we all have a perspective, and whoever's ready to fire off first, go for it.
So the question is, what do I feel about others creating, I guess, our culture that aren't Lakota or Dakota? Is that basically what the question is?
Yeah.
In a way, how I would answer that is that for myself as an artist, being Lakota, I create things because you know, I have to know what the purpose of that is. You know, I mean, what's the purpose of a chekpa or you know, different items? What are the purposes behind it? Do I know the knowledge behind that, what these items are? And if I don't know them, I'm not going to create them, because I you know, over the years, you know, I've been asked to create certain things, but sometimes, you know, I might not know too much about it, so I would probably decline on it, because I don't want to create something that that will cause, I guess, a little bit of confusion, because I'm not too sure what that's all about. You know, it's more of like emulating, and when you emulate, to me, it's not true for me. So emulation was what I see with that, you know, with other, you know, other tribes, I guess, creating, you know, Lakota or Dakota images or whatnot, articles or whatever you want to call them. But as for myself, you know, that's me as an artist, that I have to understand it before I even, you know, create something.
Thank you, James. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next. I think, that's a really big issue within different communities with art. But one of the things I think it really portrays is that there's a loss of understanding and knowledge, because a lot of these designs represent family history. They represent a family feat. They represent something significant to that family. And so when they take these designs, they're not knowing that, what this design represents. They're taking this family's knowledge and history. And it's, in a sense, it's sad, because you're wearing somebody else's family's, honoring, and they don't quite understand that we didn't just create things to create them. Every design we created had a representation, had a meaning. And there's also the lack and loss of respect to understand, like she said, that each of the things that, were created served a purpose and a deep significance to the person it was created for. And, but also acknowledging, like we talked about earlier, the boundaries of what we create and who creates it. And I use that as an example because, even as an artist, before I make anything, I, ask about it. I'll find as much as I can about it before I even make it. And then even asking myself, do I have a right to create it? And one of those things was a buffalo headdress. My family needed one, but as a woman, I seen this as a male relative's belonging. And so in not feeling right about it, I asked Shichashi to create this because he had more of a right to create it than I did. And so like when we think about today and what's happening out there with social media, you see a lot of it there. It's become taken out of context. It becomes a profit. It becomes the significance of what it represented has been taken out of context. But then that goes back to the respect of our own life ways and our own beliefs, and having people understand who they really are and where they come from. And strengthening themselves will only come from knowing who you are and who you're supposed to be, and having a respect for these cultural items and what their significance plays in a person's life.
Thank you. Who wants to go next?
I could go next. So that first part of the question, how do I feel about depicting other tribes or appropriating their work? I try not to. It's because it's not for me. They have thousands of years of experience that builds to that one image. How could I ever connect, to something like that if it's not within me? And even just like historical figures, like why would I, if they're not part of our tribe, why would I want someone to depict Maza Shah or one of our people? Because they don't have that connection to these relatives. That they might not take that tender time to depict them as people that we relate to. And I think I can explain that with like my painting of my grandma and then the image that was next to it. I really care for my Kushi. I care for how she would be depicted into the future, because that's her relatives, my relatives that are going to be looking to that painting in 100 years. There's a cascading effect that happens because a lot of native images haven't always been created by our native people. But then youth look to that and say, well, is that what we looked like? Is that what our image is based on? If somebody else is determining what we look like, and if those images are always of the past, we start to, have this dysphoria of who we are. And some of it might not even be accurate to how we identify as Dakota Lakota people. And then, just other people appropriating those designs. You're choosing what is important to that nation. You're choosing, that's the image that might become well known. But those things might not always be the most important.
All right, I guess I can go. Like when I painted Oglala Shah, I painted her so that, I could honor her achievements and other people could learn, what she achieved with her life and, find her books, find inspiration in her life story. And so I think if people are painting leaders or, these important figures, that they should be doing it in a way that honors who they are, that educates, what they did with their lives, rather than paint Sitting Bull because it will sell easily. Because I feel like a lot of the things that Native artists do is influenced heavily by what the art market will buy, because we have to make a living. And so people, they'll look for easy things that will sell just because that's the nature of it. But I think, these people who are not part of our tribe, who are painting our leaders, like, I want you to look at your own people and like who's important to your people, whose stories are not being told by you, your authentic voice. So I would say look back at your own tribe, and it could be even like your own grandmother too. It doesn't have to be some legendary figure. It could be someone in your own life that is important to you, and celebrate their achievements through your art.
Thank you, Marlena. And I'll add in again as well too. I mean, this is a big topic. This is a big discussion that can go on and on and on, really. But it's one that's very, very important to a lot of us. And I know that we all really have strong beliefs behind it, because it affects us in a way as well too. Really being artists, but also just being persons who have probably been, taken advantage of culturally as well too. We see it happen. And do we actually ever see any kind of, I guess, addressing that issue? And chances are maybe, right, there are laws in place that kind of help to keep Indian art kind of, being produced and sold, marketable as being authentic. But that kind of leads us, I think, to really what's the underlying question, which is, what is art? Who's really defining what is art? If we allow our tribal communities, or we're gonna really make this relationship to others, which I think a lot of tribal belief systems do, where we usually kind of put the priority of others before the individual, that's really kind of changing the whole concept of the artist, because it's reversed when we look at it kind of mass culture, but definitely through Western society's viewpoint of what is art. It's all about, me, I always say, me. We need to be expressive, and we need to get away with what we can, because that's part of just our urgency to be an artist. And I think a lot of tribal indigenous artists, and maybe even other cultures as well too across the world, they would have this different kind of responsibility that they really hold on to tightly, that they say, my art isn't about that, or my intentions are definitely not about that. I make art for, my community, my relatives. And this is what we're showing here with this creation story, is that we're really expanding that our involvement is kind of beyond ourselves. There has to be more purpose involved, like Tahashi James is talking about. There's more commitment and beyond just only the satisfaction that we gain individually, and the bliss that comes from seeing our objects as a finished product. There's more to it than that. There's this bigger synergy, this bigger energy that's sometimes not even just only today, but in the past as well too, but also really in the future, because a lot of us will make that claim that what we're doing is supposed to have some sort of impact into the future as well too. So I think that it really determines on who the person is, who's the artist, but also, I mean, everybody can have an opinion, everybody can have a voice of what they think. And there's a lot of different divisions to what we actually see taking place, especially when it comes to materialistic gains. But I think it can be something that maybe isn't as harsh, or meant to be directed as very aggressive. We don't want to shame others. Maybe they're just kind of, not really fully aware of what they're doing. So that's where it becomes more important, where we think, well, what is art's purpose? Is it educational? Chances are it probably is. We're trying to help others learn something maybe that we've learned, but we're also always trying to learn ourselves as well too, right? We're always trying to gather more and more to help ourselves be more proficient and more fluent. But I think we also look to, well, what is, or what's on, I guess, how could we inspire others? That's what we do as artists. How can we inspire and really get other people to look at their own structures of who they are, their own fundamentals and foundations of who they are. And with the creation story, I mean, we have these stories that have existed for many, many centuries. And I doubt that they started out inspired by, the Greek mythology, but I mean, everybody has a story. Everybody can look for their source of what they want to say. That usually is very profound to who they are. And I think that that's how we can get into these bigger discussions, just through a simple question as, what do you think about somebody doing this, you know? So thanks for that question. Peter, is there any more?
Yeah, there was one response to that, to your all answers, and it says, I think this contributes to the concept of pan-Indian, as it has been stated, we are all the same. It then becomes hard for non-natives to understand we have individual identities as peoples. I also want to offer John Gozencenter, one of the other artists in the show, is watching, and he says, John here, I'm glad to hear this generation of artists speak about the truth in their art. It is your identity, Wopila Tonka. Wanted to share that with you all. And I think maybe the last question, Keith, I'm not sure how you feel, but this question is, how have you looked or drawn from within? I hear so much discussion of looking without.
Yeah, I'll give the question to the artist, but real quickly, I want to acknowledge John. But yeah, this kind of goes back a little bit to just our previous question, but even me and John talk about, well, if we're going to say this is Lakota or even Oglala Lakota, how true is that? How many of us are truly just full 100% Oglala Lakota? You know, that's very difficult to make that claim, right? Because we even have different Oyate that mix in with us and who we are, but also even different tribal bands as well too. So even with Ochethi Sakowin, you know, it can be a little bit difficult. I'm not attempting to make all of you Dakota relatives Lakota. You know, we're not pan Lakota here. We need to encourage that we all share our voices and our stories, and we got to sometimes put the effort in to go and get those, you know, because we can't wait for somebody to do that for us. So just more lasting thoughts. Peter, can you say the question again?
Sure. That last question was, how have you looked or drawn from within? And the person commented, I hear so much discussion of looking without. So what did you bring to your artwork from inside of yourselves?
Excellent question. And we'll kind of end with that question. So you guys, what are you bringing from within? Or in this whole process, what maybe did you realize as you were looking internally, and how's that part of your work? I'm sure you guys said some of that in your statements, but maybe you can talk a little bit more on it. We'll start with James.
Okay, that's kind of a that question there is kind of like what I've been talking about. Is it's our identity that's within myself. The Sichun, you know, everything that I experience in my life is coming within, that I put forth in what I create as being Lakota. So anything that I create, you know, examples of the dolls, of the horse mask, of the shield. You know, I do 2-dimensional art and I do 3-dimensional, traditional beadwork, quill work. You know, just basically just about anything I could create. But all of that comes in from, you know, from within. You know, my wanache, you know, my soul, my spirit. That's where that comes from. So, you know, where else would it come from? You know, I just can't pull things out of the air and just try to create that. No, it's got to, me as an artist, that's the heart and soul of who I am. And like I mentioned before, that's my Wokichuza. You know, we all have a purpose in life. We walk with that. We're good at something. It could be music, it could be singing, it could be artist, it could be anything, a carpenter, you know, anything, you know, any kind of a thing that you create or work with or anything, that's our Wokichuza. We're good at whatever. So when within, so my answer to that is this my spirit as being a Lakota is creating those things that come out of me for the world to see who we are as a Lakota people. And like I said, you know, it's all coming from the Sichun. You know, everything that I learned through life, you know, experience in my life, is the heart and soul that I put into my creations to expand and to, in any way, share what I do know to I guess the younger generation, and also to the Oyata, like that. So that's I guess my answer to that question.
Thank you, James. Marlena, you want to go next?
Well, I think as as Native artists, we have a responsibility to the community. Nothing we do is separate from, our tribes or our own communities. I think it's almost impossible to ask any of us, like, what exact individual thing are you bringing to your art? Because we are who we are based upon our family or where we grew up. But I say the thing I bring would be just my interest in digital art and computers. Maybe that's not something widely accessible to Native people, and so they don't have the resources to even use these tools. But I mean, that's the only thing I can say that I bring of myself that maybe not everyone else is using.
Well, that's great. And I mean, we definitely can consider it like privileges too, right? Things that we have that we know we don't want to just hoard them to ourselves, that they should be shared. We're out there gaining these for the others as well too. Inkpa, what about you?
Would you be able to share my painting again? I wanted to point out something on it. So one of the ways that I've kind of looked within was really my experience of how the Oglala Lakota has really helped me as a messenger. But then just over the last year, I've been looking because I didn't have, that one person in my life that knew, the whole narrative of this epic, and to explain, well, what is this part of Tate? Why does Tate do this? So my next best thing was, do what our ancestors did. Charles Eastman talks about, we found our spirituality by being alone in nature. So that's what I kind of went towards. And when I say this is an abstraction, it's actually two images of the windiest places within my homeland. So I went out on the windiest day and I took a photograph of the prairie. And then from there, I digitally manipulated it. I put some water swirls and things like that. But then I focused in on other areas like, how does Tate affect the waters? How does Tate affect the weather? How does Tate affect the birds? How does Tate affect, our prayers, or even the movement of energies around us? And that was really more personal to me. And then learning more about what is my spirituality, what is my beliefs within all of these things. And what I started to form was that it's a duality in all things. And I think Tate kind of represents a duality just within his story. His partner becomes a double-faced person. He both takes on a male and female role of taking care of his children. Tate is both heat and cool, it's both warmth and cool. It's good and bad, that when you feel, even just a couple weeks ago, that harsh, cold wind of the winter that's biting at your skin. But then you feel the opposite of that during Sundance when, you feel the dry heat of the wind. You really start to experience and gain an appreciation for these relatives. And that's really what I wanted to show and help others realize is these relatives kind of have a duality within them. They're working at these extremes, but when they find that center, you find that Wicahpi. And that's what I kind of believe in, Sundance or going up on the hill or sweat. You're giving, you're taking. It's both life and death. And when you center on those things, you're able to reach and be part of that Wicahpi, that spirituality there. So that's how I kind of looked within to find an understanding of Tate as a relative.
Thank you, Inkpa. Kashi, Randilynn.
I think a lot of times, like when I think of this word artist, for myself, I really pull away from it, because when I create something and I make something, I think of doing it as a relative, as fulfilling my kinship responsibility to those around me. And so when I create it, it's not art, but it's the love and compassion and respect that I have for the relative that I'm giving it to. You know, when I make these things that are baby items or for young women or for my male relatives, it's not so much because I can create it or I can make it, but because I'm going to put everything into it, because that's my role, my kinship role to them as my relative. And so, and these pieces, they're not art. They become a part of their life. They become a part of what they're going to carry, what they need. And I'm just helping them. And so in creating it, to me, it's that love, to continue, teaching and giving and going back as Dakota women have before. And you think of everything that our relatives had made for one another. There was a deep love between the people. And if I can bring that back, that's more important to me in showing my relatives that I cherish them than looking at it as a piece of art.
Thank you. Thank you guys all again. And Peter, do you have any last kind of comments or anything?
No, I think we're good. There's a lot of celebration of everyone and the conversation today, but I think you can wrap it up however you want to, Keith.
All right, thank you, Peter. And thank you everybody who's asking questions and here with us today. And thank you just so much for your time. We do appreciate that, right? That's one of the things that I was always told, is that you don't want to take advantage of anyone's time. That's the one thing that you don't want to ask from people and waste. So we're very thankful, and me personally, thank you all for your time. I do appreciate it, and I look forward to more of your time in the future, especially to see how you're gonna, in a way, start to take this exhibition and how, let it grow even, to unimaginable ways that we don't even know yet. Just thank you guys. Okay. I'll allow you guys to say any last words, any last, farewells, whatever you want to say. So whoever wants to go for it, go for it. Or we could just all unmute ourselves at once and just say Doksha. We'll see you guys at the opening in December at Oglala Lakota Museum. If not, we might see you at Red Cloud at the Heritage Center, or who knows just yet. There's going to be more announcements of where this exhibition is going to be available at, and you're going to get a chance to see these artists, and you're definitely going to see their work, but also hopefully engage with more of the programming that's going to develop around this exhibition as well too. So, all right, guys, Dokshas.
Doksha, thank you for everything.
Toksha, okay.
Doksha, thanks for having us.
Yeah, Keith, I just want to thank you and Racing Magpie, Peter, and all the other artists today. Randilynn, Inkpa, Marlena,
Thank you.
Definitely, Keith, you've really made like all of this possible. You've brought 8 people together and more now, and because of you and your gift of Sichu, everything of that, you're helping people learn now. We're bringing this back. We've started that rolling. Now it's going to keep going within all of us. So even everybody online, I really hope that you spend that time to think about these figures. And if you don't know about the stories we're talking about, go ask somebody. Go ask me. I'm on Facebook. I don't know everything, but I can lead you to the people that can help, or anybody here can help with that.
Very good. Thank you, Inkpa. All right, guys. Have a good rest of your Sunday, and we'll see you again soon.